Have you ever had one of those evenings that felt almost perfect? You've just spent the day with someone you truly enjoy. Maybe you went for a quiet lunch, shared a few laughs, talked about old memories, or simply sat together in a comfortable silence that didn't need to be filled. There was no pressure, no expectations, just ease, just warmth. And then the evening ends. You say your goodbyes, maybe there's a gentle hug, a promise to talk tomorrow, and then you turn, walk to your car, and drive home, alone. You step into your house. It's quiet, exactly the way you like it. Your chair is where you left it. Your cup sits in its familiar place. Everything is yours, just as you arranged it. There is a certain peace in that, a deep, earned comfort. But if you're honest, there might also be a moment, a small one, a quiet one, where something feels missing. Now, don't misunderstand me. This isn't regret. It's not even sadness exactly. It's something more subtle than that, something harder to put into words. And this is the hidden side of what we talked about in our last conversation. We explored the beauty of living apart together, the freedom, the independence, the ability to love someone deeply without losing yourself in the process. And for many, it truly is a wonderful way to build a relationship in this stage of life. But today, I want to talk about something that almost no one mentions, not because it's unimportant, but because it's uncomfortable. There is a quiet emotional gap that can exist in this kind of relationship, a space that isn't always visible at first, but over time can begin to grow if we don't understand it. Let me tell you about someone I'll call Margaret. Margaret is 74. She's been living on her own for nearly 15 years. After her husband passed, she slowly rebuilt her life, piece by piece. She found joy again in simple things, morning walks, gardening, her weekly bridge group. And then, a few years ago, she met Daniel. Daniel is kind, thoughtful, a widower himself. They connected almost instantly. Their conversations flowed easily, their values aligned, and most importantly, they made each other feel alive again. But when the question of what next came up, Margaret felt something shift inside her. She didn't want to remarry. She didn't want to move in together. She loved her home, her routines, the independence she had fought so hard to rebuild. And thankfully, Daniel understood. In fact, he felt the same way. So they chose companionship, living apart together. And for a long time, it was beautiful. They had dinners together, spent weekends exploring nearby towns, attended family gatherings as a couple. They were, in every meaningful sense, partners. But slowly, quietly, something began to change. Margaret told me one afternoon, "It's strange. I'm happy when we're together, but sometimes when I come home, I feel a kind of emptiness I didn't expect." She paused for a moment and then added, "It's not that I want him living here. I just wish, I wish he was here, but not all the time." Do you hear the contradiction in that? I want you, but I also want my space. This is the emotional paradox that very few people talk about. You see, living apart together gives you something incredibly valuable, your independence. But at the same time, it can quietly limit something else we all need, even if we don't always admit it. A sense of shared presence, not planned time together, not scheduled visits, but the simple, ordinary feeling of someone being there without effort. The sound of another person moving in the next room, a casual conversation while making tea, that unspoken companionship that comes not from trying, but from simply existing in the same space. When you live separately, every moment together becomes intentional, planned, chosen, and while that sounds ideal, and often is, it can also mean that the unplanned moments of connection begin to disappear, and those moments are more important than we realize. They are what create a deeper emotional rhythm between two people. Without them, a relationship can start to feel like something you visit rather than something you live inside. Now, this doesn't happen to everyone. For some, the balance is perfect, the independence feels freeing, and the time together feels meaningful enough. But for others, especially over time, a quiet question can begin to surface. Is this enough? And that question doesn't come from dissatisfaction. It comes from something much deeper. It comes from being human. Because no matter how independent we become, no matter how much we value our own space, there is still a part of us that longs for closeness that isn't scheduled, closeness that just exists. And when that part goes unmet, even in a loving relationship, it can create a subtle emotional distance, not dramatic, not obvious, but real. Margaret didn't talk about this right away. In fact, she felt almost guilty for feeling it. After all, she had exactly what she thought she wanted: freedom, companionship, peace. So why this quiet ache? Why this feeling that something was slightly out of reach? This is where many people get confused, because living apart together solves many problems, but it doesn't eliminate emotional needs. It simply changes the way those needs are met. And if we're not careful, we can mistake independence for completeness. We can believe that because everything looks right on the surface, everything must feel right underneath. But relationships, especially at this stage of life, are not just about avoiding problems. They're about understanding ourselves deeply enough to recognize what we truly need, not just what we think we should want. And sometimes, those two things are not the same. Margaret sat with that feeling for a long time. She didn't rush to fix it. She didn't even fully understand it at first. She just noticed it, quietly, honestly. And that, in itself, is something many people never do. Because it's much easier to ignore these small emotional signals than to explore them, especially when everything on the surface seems to be working. But feelings like this don't disappear simply because we don't name them. They wait. And over time, they grow, not louder, but deeper. One evening, after spending a lovely day with Daniel, Margaret decided to say something. Not dramatically, not as a complaint, just as a truth. She said, "Can I share something with you? I'm not even sure how to explain it properly." Daniel smiled and said, "Of course." She hesitated for a moment and then continued, "I love what we have, I really do. But sometimes when I go home, I feel this strange emptiness. And I don't think it's because I want things to change completely. I just feel like there's a part of connection we're not experiencing." Now, this is a delicate moment in any relationship, because what you say can easily be misunderstood. It can sound like dissatisfaction, like a hidden request for more, like the beginning of pressure. But that's not what Margaret was doing. She wasn't asking Daniel to move in. She wasn't questioning their relationship. She was simply inviting honesty into a space that had, until now, remained unspoken. And that makes all the difference. Daniel didn't react defensively. He didn't try to fix it immediately. Instead, he said something that surprised her. "I've felt that too, sometimes." And just like that, the conversation shifted from uncertainty to understanding. You see, this hidden problem is not a flaw in the relationship. It's a signal that something within the emotional balance needs attention, not correction, not replacement, just awareness. Because living apart together works beautifully when both people are not only aligned in their lifestyle, but also aware of their evolving emotional needs. And here's something very important to understand. Those needs can change. What felt perfect in the beginning might feel slightly different a year later, not because something is wrong, but because connection deepens over time. And with that depth, new layers of emotional closeness naturally begin to surface. So the real question is not, is living apart together good or bad? The real question is, are we still listening to ourselves and to each other as this relationship grows? Because the risk isn't in choosing independence. The risk is in becoming so comfortable with the structure that we stop paying attention to the experience. Margaret and Daniel didn't rush into any decisions after that conversation. They didn't suddenly decide to change everything. Instead, they did something much more powerful. They adjusted, gently, thoughtfully. They began by increasing small moments of connection, not by moving in together, but by allowing more presence into their lives. Sometimes Daniel would stay over for a couple of nights, not as a permanent change, but as a shared experience. Margaret, in turn, started spending more relaxed, unplanned time at Daniel's place, not always as a visit, but sometimes just to be. They introduced more spontaneity into their connection, less scheduling, more natural flow, and slowly that quiet emotional gap began to soften, not because they changed their entire lifestyle, but because they acknowledged something most people ignore, that independence and closeness are not opposites, they are a balance. And like any balance, it requires adjustment, awareness, and most importantly, honesty. Now, I want you to pause for a moment and reflect on your own situation. If you are in or considering a relationship like this, ask yourself something very simple but very important. When I am alone after being with this person, what do I truly feel? Not what you think you should feel, not what looks right from the outside, but what you actually feel in that quiet moment. Is it peace? Is it contentment? Or is there a small part of you that longs for something just a little more? There's no right or wrong answer here, only awareness. Because the truth is, living apart together is not a fixed formula. It's a living, breathing arrangement. And like any meaningful connection, it needs to evolve. It needs space, but it also needs presence. It needs independence, but it also needs intimacy. And finding that balance is not something you decide once. It's something you continue to discover together. This is what nobody talks about, not because it's negative, but because it requires a level of emotional honesty that many people are not used to practicing, especially after a lifetime of following defined roles and expectations. But this stage of life, this chapter, is different. It's not about following a script anymore. It's about writing your own. And sometimes that means revisiting your choices, not to question them, but to refine them, to make them even more aligned with who you are becoming. Margaret didn't regret her decision, not for a moment. In fact, she once told me, "This is still the happiest I've been in years." But what changed was her understanding. She no longer saw independence as something that needed to be protected at all costs, and she no longer saw closeness as something that threatened her peace. She realized that both could exist if she allowed them to, if she communicated, if she stayed aware, if she stayed open. And that might be the most important lesson of all. Because at this stage of life, love is no longer about fitting into a structure. It's about creating one that fits you, perfectly, gently, honestly. So if you ever find yourself in that quiet moment, standing in your home after a beautiful day with someone you care about, and you feel that small, almost invisible emotion, don't ignore it. Don't judge it. Just listen. Because it might not be telling you that something is wrong, it might simply be showing you what is still possible. And that is not something to fear, it's something to understand, and maybe something to gently explore. If this conversation resonated with you, I would truly love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever experienced this feeling, or are you currently navigating a relationship where independence and closeness are both important to you? Share your experience in the comments. Your story might help someone else understand their own. And if you'd like to continue exploring these deeper, often unspoken aspects of relationships after 60, consider subscribing, because these conversations, they matter more than we often realize. Until next time, take care of yourself and of the connections that bring meaning to your life.